Hello and welcome to Art with Miss Michelle. Today I'm going to show you how to paint a still life of flowers. So artists have been painting flowers for hundreds if not thousands of years. Flowers are very beautiful and inspirational to a lot of people, so I can understand why people would want to paint them. For this project you could use whatever kind of paint you'd like. I'm going to use acrylic. You could use acrylic, watercolor, tempera, or if you're feeling ambitious, you could even try oil paint. You're going to need some brushes, particularly some thin detailed brushes, and a couple bigger brushes for your bigger areas. I like these round brushes that kind of come to a point at the end. I use these for most of my paintings that I do. And then a palette or a paper plate or something to put your paint on. Some water to rinse your brush. I like to have a paper towel so I can dry the water off my brush. Paper or canvas or something to paint on. And some flowers and either a jar, a vase, or like a cool bottle. You don't have to have a fancy vase. You could find just like a unique container to put them in. A pitcher would be cool. Whatever inspires you. And I just wanted to show you a couple pictures here. So this is a painting that my great-grandmother did. She has lots of different types of flowers in here. I just have one type, so you could either use a lot of different flowers or one or two types. If you don't want to pick the flowers from your yard, this is a project that could also be done outside. This is a painting I did of some poppies, and I just went outside and set up in the garden and painted them. Although it took me a couple years because the poppies only bloom for a couple days, and this is a pretty large painting, so I'm pretty proud of it. So I just picked these daylilies from my yard, so if you can find some flowers to use, you can pick them. And then you'll be ready to go. Okay, so I have my paper or canvas set up with my flowers in the view that I want. And then I have lots of different colors of paint. So the trick is to use lots of different colors and mix your colors to get different shades to make your painting look more realistic. So these flowers, they look yellow. But when I look at these, I see some spots that are lighter where the light's hitting them. I see some darker shadows, different little stripes in them. So I have a couple different colors of yellow. And then I might even mix some yellow and white together to get, it's the same color, but it's a lighter shade. I have some gray. So I could even mix some yellow and gray together to make some of my shadows that I see on the flowers. I also have a couple different greens. And then I have some brown for the table and these little middle parts of the flower. So before I start painting, I'm going to kind of plan this out. And I can even use my paintbrush to help me measure. So I'm going to see how tall my jar is. So I'm just going to put my paintbrush so it's touching the table and then put my fingers at the top of the jar. And then if I put it up to here, so I'm starting at the top of the jar, I can see my flowers go above the jar a little bit more than the height of the jar. So my jar is going to take up a little bit less than half of my picture. And then the flowers are going to be slightly taller. And then I might want to leave a little bit of room on the bottom and the top so they're not like going to the edges. So I might just start with the jar. And I can see the bottom isn't quite flat. The bottom is a circle. So I'm going to make the bottom curved. And this jar is kind of tricky because it's clear. And obviously I can't paint something with clear paint. Otherwise no one would see it. So I just made kind of a light gray color that I'm going to use for the edge of the jar. So So it might be a cool challenge, or if it's too much of a challenge, you could use a different colored container to put your flowers in. So the bottom, I can kind of see the other edge through the glass, so I'm just making the bottom of my jar all gray. So when you look at something and you can't quite paint it the way it is, and then you change it a little bit for your painting, that's called taking an artistic license. And it's something artists have to do a lot. And it helps you be creative. So it's perfectly fine to change something or paint it the way you see it, so it's a little bit easier for you, or just however you want to do it. Okay, so now I'm going to paint the sides of my jar, and I can see at the top it goes in a little bit. And then I can also see the opening of my jar is round, kind of like I saw the bottom part. So I'm going to paint that top part open. And then I'm going to add the top of the water that I see in there. Okay, so now I'm ready to start with my flowers. So if it's easier for you, you can start with the stems. I'm going to start with just the shapes of my flowers and add the stems later. So I'm going to start with a medium yellow. And I'm just going to look for little details in my flowers to make them look realistic. So the first detail I notice is there's kind of the stem turns yellow and there's a long yellow part leading up to my flower. So I'm going to draw that first, or paint it. And then I see my flower starts out skinny and then gets a little bit wider. I'm going to jump to this side of the flower. And I'm going to paint the opening. So I'm using all the same color right now, so I can overlap some stuff. And then when I start adding details and stuff, I can kind of just blend this yellow in to the rest of my colors, so I won't necessarily see every line that I drew. So I'm working on this petal right now. I just noticed that it curves a little bit, so I'm making a curved line. And then I'm going to paint the other side of it. Then this one I'm going to do next. I can see that it goes down and then part of it curves behind it. So when I make the lines for my petals, I'm going to kind of make them curve the same way so they match. And then this bottom part looks straight to me. So I'm going to do a straight line there. And then in the back, I'm going to curve it again and show the point. Okay, so now that I have the shape of all my petals, I'm just going to start coloring them with my different shades of yellow. So I noticed the inside of my flower looks a little bit darker. So I'm going to switch to my darker yellow, and I'm going to mix just a little bit of gray in with that. I could also try some of this brown, and I'm just doing a tiny bit to make a little bit darker shade of yellow. So I'm going to use that inside my flower. And then I'm going to do one petal at a time. I'm going to color it in depending on if I think it's darker or lighter. I'm going to do one color. So if I think it's a lighter petal, I'm going to start with my lighter yellow. Fill that in with my paint. And then if I see any shadows, I can take my darker yellow. This one I see some shadows and some lines. So actually I'm going to switch to a smaller brush so I can get some of these small details. I'm going to add some lines on here. And they're going to kind of curve with the shape of the flower. Or sorry, the shape of the flower petal. And then if I think those look a little bit too gray, which I do, I'm just going to take a tiny bit of yellow and go back over it and kind of blend it in. And I'm just going to follow these lines so I keep the line and kind of blend all those colors together. So then I'm just going to do the same thing with the next petal, and if I notice anything that looks really, really light, which is called a highlight, so I see some light parts on the edges here, I can just add some white over my yellow, and that's going to make that stand out. If I want to, I can mix it with a little bit of yellow, or I can just take a little bit on my brush and kind of blend it in on my paper. So if you add light and dark spots, highlights and shadows, it's going to give your painting a lot of contrast, and that is going to make it look realistic. If you just use like one solid color of yellow, it's going to make your painting look kind of flat. So adding these different light and dark places, it's going to give it more depth, and it's going to make it look more realistic. If you don't have the patience for this and you just want to do the shape of your flowers and not spend too much time on it, that is perfectly fine too. I know everyone has different attention spans, so if you don't want to take all this time and just want to do a quicker painting and get the shape of it, you can also do that. But I think it's really fun to try to capture the look of the flower and get all the fine details. And that's going to help you really improve your art skills. Okay, so I have one flower painted, the whole outline of all the petals and colored in. So now I'm gonna add the stem, and I can see there's one little bud on my flower that I'm gonna add too. So I don't have quite the color green that I want, so I'm just gonna mix some darker green and some brighter green together. And I'll actually, since this dark green is pretty dark, I'm probably gonna need less of that color and more of the brighter green. And I actually see the part of the stem right here is a bit darker, and this is nice and light up here, so I could actually blend that on my paper. So I'm going to want a pretty thin brush for the stem, and I'm going to start with the slightly darker color, and I'm going to start in here. And I see it's kind of in between the edge and the middle of the jar, and it comes out at an angle. And if I really want to challenge myself, I can try to paint the ripple in the jar where the water goes around the stem there. So I'm just going to connect it to my flower, and I could even blend these green and yellow colors together right there a little bit, because I can see they kind of blend a little bit where they meet. And then I'm going to take the lighter green and add another stem coming out of that stem for the bud. I'm going to add a little bit of lighter green to this too, because it gets pretty light up here. And then I think I'm actually going to add a little bit of yellow to this bud too. And I'm just going to blend it in right on my paper here. And then I might take a really thin brush, like the thinnest brush that I have, and just add some green lines onto there. That's going to make it look very realistic. So any really thin details that you add with a thin brush are just going to make your picture look very realistic. Try to get at least one or two thin brushes, and you can use those for all of your really small details. And a huge part of painting stuff like this is just looking at it to see what kind of small details you notice, and then you can add those to your painting. Okay, so I'm happy with my bud, and I'm happy with my flower. I'm just going to rinse my brushes off a little bit, and then I'm going to add these middle parts of the flower here. I'm going to make a very light yellow, almost white. It can't be too yellow because I don't want it to blend in with the rest of my flower. So I'm probably going to make it lighter than it is in real life, because this looks pretty close to this color, but I want to be able to see it really well. So I'm just going to make it a little bit extra light so it stands out. I'm going to use my artistic license. So I'm using my thicker brush to mix. I'd never want to use my really thin brushes to do that kind of mixing, because it will make them not as thin. If I do that, it's going to spread the bristles out a little bit. So once I have the color that I want, and I notice they stick out and then they curl up. And in this flower, they all curl up in the same direction. In other flowers, they might curve in different directions. So that's one thing you can look for when you're looking for your small details to add to your picture. Okay, so now I have one nice stem with my flower and bud painted on here. I'm not going to do the other one on the video, but I did want to talk about the table line. So I could leave it like this, but then it kind of just looks like I have a jar with a flower in it floating in the air. So I want to make my jar look like it's sitting on the table, but I don't see the edge of the table directly underneath my jar, unless I just bent down and my eye level was right at the edge of the table. You can see actually the edge of the table back here because my jar is right in the middle of the table. So when I look straight on at my jar, I see the edge of the table about right here. So I'm going to try to make a pretty straight line, which is actually one of the hardest things to paint is a straight line. But I'm just going to go from my jar to the edge of my canvas. And then I do actually see it inside my jar, since it's clear. So if you have a different colored container, you probably won't be able to see through it. And then I'm just really carefully going to go to the edge of my flower. And then I want to try to line this up on the other side of my flower. So I'm going to lift up my brush and try to keep it right at the same level. And then I'll put it back down on the other side of my flower. So now I have the edge of the table, and I'll want to use my smaller brush to paint around my flower really carefully. But then once I get away from my flower, I can switch to a bigger brush to fill in this big area back here. So I'll fill this in, and then you might want to check and see if you see a shadow on the table of your jar or vase or whatever your flowers are in, and you can add that too. So keep painting. You can add as many flowers and details as you like, and hopefully you have some nice flowers in your yard that you can pick to paint, or if you don't want to pick them, you can just go paint them while they're still on the plant. And I really hope everyone likes this project. If you do this project, please share a picture of it so we can see your beautiful, beautiful work. So I hope you like this video, and happy flower painting.